Gaza Strip means the coastal enclave will be unlivable by the year 2020. That's according to the United Nations, and the prediction was made 7 years ago. Well, we've reached 2020, and the truth of the matter is that Gaza is indeed unlivable by any means of the imagination. But there are other questions here. Did the blockade of Gaza leave it in a state of poverty just now this year? Or has this been the case in the years following the imposition of the siege by Israel in 2007? In terms of the humanitarian situation, poverty levels, unemployment, medical facilities, and so on. I'm your host, Hussam Bahrani, and on this episode of Palestine Files, we're going to take a closer look at the dire situation that is taking place and has been taking place in what is the world's largest open-air prison. Despite sounding the alarm a long time ago that the besieged Gaza Strip will be unlivable by 2020, many experts believe this has always been the case since Israel imposed the siege in 2007. Tel Aviv has choked off the coastal enclave from every possible angle. This includes a land, air, and sea blockade. In 2015, the World Bank estimated the GDP losses caused by the Israeli blockade stood at 50%. Welfare services dropped substantially. The manufacturing sector shrunk by 60%, while Gaza's exports literally disappeared. However, these are not the only crises facing the residents of Gaza. A 2017 UN report found other serious areas of concern.
I see this extraordinarily inhuman and an unjust process of strangling gradually 2 million civilians in Gaza that really pose a threat to nobody. I don't know, we talk about the unlivability of Gaza. When you're down to 2 hours a day of electricity, which is the case earlier this week, when you've got 60% youth unemployment rates, where you really do have such a little horizon. For me, and you probably, and most of the people watching, that unlivability threshold has been passed quite a long time ago.
The former UN envoy pleaded for civilians to be put first, saying they are being strangled from all corners. The former UN human rights chief has slammed Tel Aviv, saying Gazans are caged in a toxic slum from birth to death.
The fundamental message is someone has got to step back and put the interests of civilians at the top of the queue for a change.
Zaid Ra'ad al-Hussein accuses Israel of depriving the Palestinians of their most basic human rights. Let's check out just some of the statistics. Now, the population of the besieged Gaza Strip is growing steeply. The latest figures we have are estimated at 2.4 million people. The majority of them need some form of assistance. Let's see the employment rate, for example. 52% are unemployed, and this concerns the year 2019. More than half of the population is without work. Poverty rate, 38%, again for 2019. But here comes perhaps the most shocking statistic of them all. 90% of Gaza's residents, 90% has difficulty accessing drinkable water. Just imagine the health issues that this can lead to. Now, our team spent some time speaking to residents in besieged Gaza. Let's hear what they have to say.
بالتأكيد الوضع الحالي في غزة بعد أكثر من 10 سنوات من الحصار ومن التضييق، 10 سنوات من المنع من السفر، 10 سنوات من انقطاع الكهرباء لساعات طويلة خلال النهار والليل. بالتأكيد غزة الآن أصبحت يوم عن يوم تزيد الحياة فيها صعوبة.
والله اليوم أنا عمري 25 سنة، تقريبا بتقدر تقول 12 سنة من عمري راحوا ما بعرفش عنهم إشي. تمام، من دراسة لشغل لمشاكل عائلية لمشاكل اجتماعية لمشاكل سياسية في القطاع. في غزة احنا اليوم 2020 صرنا، الناس في 2000 وكل سنة من سنة بتقدموا، احنا بالعكس كل سنة بتيجي عنا بنتأخر وبنرجع لورا.
اجت سنة جديدة والناس بتفائل خير بالوضع يعني انه يتحسن الوضع والناس تقدر تعيش بشكل بسيط.
الوضع الاقتصادي اول اشي صعب، الكهرباء ما في، يعني ما في دولة بالعالم يعني الكهرباء بتقطع فيها بهذا العدد من الساعات، وهذا عائق يعني في كتير مجالات. احنا كشباب يعني عندنا كتير طموحات واحلام مش قادرين نحققها بسبب الوضع الاقتصادي الصعب، بسبب انه ما فينا نتحرك، ما فينا نسافر، احنا محصورين.
بدي أحكي إنه إحنا كأهل غزة محرومين من المقومات الأساسية لحياة طبيعية. عندنا مؤهلات عالية والشباب متخرجين، لكن مو قادرين إنه يطلعوا مواهبهم ويستفيدوا من شهاداتهم. اقتصاديا مدمرين، بنية تحتية غير موجودة.
وأنا بشتغلش بتخصص، بشتغل تخصص تاني، يعني إنه لأنه ما فيش للتربية، أو لو في بكون الراتب قليل جدا. هذا بالنسبة للوظائف. بالنسبة للحالة الاجتماعية أكثر من ناس وأكثر من أسرة بسمع إنه ما فيش عندها مسكن وما فيش عندهم أكل وشرب.
الواحد لما بده يجي يدرس ما في حتى فلوس يدخل جامعة.
Okay, let's bring in our first guest for the show. Ariel Gold is the National Co-Director of Code Pink. Before being banned from entering occupied Palestine in June 2018, Ariel used to travel to the occupied territories annually to work with Palestinian individuals and organizations on the ground in their struggle for freedom and justice. Mr. Gold, welcome to Palestine Files. Firstly, 7 years ago, the UN said Gaza would be unlivable by the year 2020, yet the facts on the ground indicate this has been the case for quite a while now. What do you make of all this?
This is an entirely man-made catastrophe, and the blame for it rests solely at the feet of Israel. Israel has blockaded Gaza on all sides, air, land, and sea, preventing necessary materials from entering. They have a buffer zone around Gaza so that the people cannot farm large portions of their land, because if they enter that part of the land, Israel will shoot at them. Israel has carried out repeated military massacres in Gaza, and when they do so, they bomb places like hospitals and infrastructure, and then they prevent materials from entering the area to rebuild. So of course, after so many bombing campaigns, including the bombing of infrastructure, Gaza cannot treat its own water. And as a result, 97% of the water in Gaza is undrinkable, contaminated by saline and sewage.
Right. Now, why has there been inaction by the international community in terms of what's happening in Gaza?
The reason that there has been inaction is the United States. The United States acts like the bully of the world, whether it is sanctioning Iran and forcing countries around the world, including countries in Europe, not to trade with Iran, or it is demanding that nothing be done to end the brutal siege on Gaza. The United States holds the United Nations hostage and provides Israel with unquestioned diplomatic immunity, as well as with financial support. So the US is preventing action from the world, and the people of the world are in fact outraged by the situation in Gaza. But because of the United States and because of the siege, because it is so difficult to enter Gaza, it's very hard to get stuff done about this.
Right. Now, what do you think it is that Tel Aviv has not been held accountable for this?
Hopefully, Israel will be held accountable soon. They are now being taken to the International Criminal Court for war crimes. This includes the building of illegal settlements and the repeated massacres that they have carried out in Gaza. The difficulty in holding them accountable is, again, the U.S.'s cover, the way that the U.S. provides cover for them. And we shouldn't be surprised that the U.S. provides cover for Israel because the U.S. itself is guilty of war crimes and has not been held accountable.
Right.
Israel is a settler colonial project that refuses to give up its racism and apartheid. And the United States, a country built on slavery and racism and ethnic cleansing, is a partner with Israel to refuse to take accountability and to refuse to change in the direction of justice.
Okay, Ms. Gold, co-director of the Code Pink movement, thanks a lot for your contribution. Dear viewers, we're going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere, because we're going to be right back with the rest of the show. Because of the Israeli blockade, many Palestinians are forced to rely on basic services from aid agencies to survive. However, even these organizations are now facing their own funding problems.
Looking to the future, I'm hopeful that donors will step in to alleviate the suffering of all of these people in Gaza and the West Bank.
Zainat Hindi is a mother of 10 living in one of many refugee camps in Gaza.
عايشين من قلة الموت. كيف عايشين لما يكون انت واولادك قاعدين في مكان واحد؟ ابني 16 سنة، بنتي 20. البنات والأولاد كلهم بيناموا في مكان واحد. ما فيش عندي خصوصية في البيت، لا للبنات ولا للأولاد ولا إلي أنا.
Gaza doesn't have the purchasing power, and the industry sector is not good enough, is not in good shape to work. Gaza need finance, they need cash, they need input that keep or make the economy cycles.
Unemployment is another major crisis in besieged Gaza. At this carpentry workshop, the owner says there is no work left.
وقف الشغل كله، وقف المعابر ووقف الشغل وما فيش معابر نصدر عليها. وبعنا المكان اللي في الزوايدة ورجعنا على مكاننا الصغير هذا نشتغل على قد طلبيات البلد. طاولة وطاولتين وثلاثة، بالأول كنا نعمل بال200 و300 طاولة وكراسي بال2000 كرسي. اليوم كله هذا الشغل خلص وراح انتهى.
What I always say is that there is no economy in Gaza. There is a group of people who are dependent to a large extent on external relief. There is no full economic cycle activity due to the closure.
Perhaps Ashraf, who is living in a Gazan refugee camp, best sums up the situation.
الشعب يا اختي زي ما قالها ممثل مصري محطوطين بخلاط اسمه خلاط الفقر. خلاط الفقر لا احنا عارفين وين ولا ايش نساوي مش عارفين.
Mr. Abdul Rahim is the head of the health department at Gaza's municipality. Our team sat down with Mr. Al-Rahim to discuss the crises facing Gaza. He raises some important points. Have a look.
طبعا الكل يعلم انه احنا بدأنا في 2020 وتقرير هيئة الأمم المتحدة حذرت قبل سنوات عديدة انه قطاع غزة لا يصلح للحياة في عام 2020. طبعا اللي هو الساكن في قطاع غزة يعاني معاناة شديدة من تدني الخدمات الأساسية زي خدمة المياه، خدمة الصرف الصحي، وخدمة الشواطئ، وخدمة اللي هي النظافة العامة، وناهيك عن الخدمات الإنشائية والبنية التحتية وخلافه. فعلا نحن نعيش في ظروف طارئة جدا وظروف صعبة أثرت على كل مناحي الحياة وأثرت سلبا على المواطن الفلسطيني في قطاع غزة. التدهور الكل يعلم أنه أصل التدهور هو الحصار المفروض على قطاع غزة، والحالة الاقتصادية اللي اتدهورت، البطالة اللي هي المرتفعة جدا اللي عدت 50%. اليوم في عندنا أكثر من 350 ألف عاطل عن العمل، سواء كان خريج أو عامل أو تاجر أو خلافه. طبعا هذه اللي هي أثرت على كل الحركة التجارية والحركة الاقتصادية في قطاع غزة، وبالتالي عجلة الاقتصاد شبه متوقفة. والمسؤول عن هذا التدهور هو طبعا الجانب الإسرائيلي، حيث يفرض حصار مشدد على قطاع غزة. المجتمع الدولي اللي عنده مفروض يضغط على كل الجهات التي تحاصر قطاع غزة، وخاصة الجانب الإسرائيلي، حتى يشعر المواطن الفلسطيني بأكثر حرية. يعني اليوم نجد صعوبة في اللي هي التحرك من قطاع غزة إلى اللي هي المجتمع الدولي أو الدول الأجنبية فيما يتعلق بالعلاج والعمل والسفر، وهذا وضع صعب جدا، ناهيك عن منع دخول غالبية اللي هي القطع التي تستخدم أو المواد التي تستخدم في إعادة ترميم اللي هي البنية التحتية، لأنه ممنوع تدخل قطاع غزة.
Now then, it's time to bring in our second and final guest of the show. Beth Harris is a board member of Jewish Voices for Peace. Her activism against Israel's occupation and the violation of Palestinian rights began in 1995. Ms. Harris, welcome to Palestine Files. Firstly, if you can please share with our audience your views on the situation in Gaza.
I think this is absolutely true. Gaza has been created into this open-air prison, so to speak, and it cannot have a viable economy. While now it's nearly 50% of the people are unemployed, in 2012 it was about 30%. Today, 97% of the water is undrinkable. In 2012, it was 90% was undrinkable. I mean, that's unlivable already. Medicines aren't available because the borders are closed.
Right.
The majority of, more than the majority of the population is food insecure. It has to depend on humanitarian aid just to eat. And in addition, the conditions, which are very poor, are escalated by the fact that Israel can bomb Gaza anytime it wants. And when it bombs Gaza, a number of things happen, including the destruction of thousands and thousands of houses, and then they aren't allowed to get the building materials in to rebuild the houses. So there is like impossible conditions that are constantly getting worse.
How sad. And on top of all this, Israel holds Gaza under an illegal siege. Many are comparing the Israeli blockade on Gaza to Nazi-like action. What do you think?
Well, there are just a lot of different ways to describe what Nazi-like action is. But my research on the concentration camps showed that one of the key elements of the camps is that they were created as states of exception. And what that meant is the people who were taken into the camps were not protected by law. They were in an exception to law. So they were subject to whatever their captors decided should happen with their lives. And that could be annihilation, being sent to the gas chambers. It could be that some who are privileged might be allowed to live. But the key issue is that there is no law governing what could be done to them. And in this way, the enclave of Gaza is also the same kind of state of exception. And we see that every time there is a bombing of this enclave where people can't get out or go anywhere. And so they're slaughtered in their apartment buildings where they're living, in their sleep. And then there's no one ever held accountable for these mass murders. And in this sense, the Palestinians have been put outside the protection of fundamental human rights law, including the right to live.
Beth Harris, board member of Jewish Voices for Peace, on that rather sad note. Thank you very much for your input. Dear viewers, it's time to take to social media and find out what the international online community has said. Well, that was social media, but what about global media? What have the international headlines reported? What else can we say about the largest open-air prison in the world that we haven't already discussed on this episode of Palestine Files? A lot, actually. There is so much more to say, but time has gotten the better of us. I'll just leave you with this. Decades of occupation and more than 10 years of the Israeli siege, the land, air and sea blockade has made more than 2 million people's lives unbearable, to the extent that they began risking their lives on a weekly basis every Friday because of that hopelessness, that lack of security, that lack of employment, lack of medical services, lack of food, lack of freedom to move, and many other essential things. That's why today Gaza is described as the largest open-air prison in the world, with Israel being none other than the prison guard. Thank you for staying tuned. From me and the whole team, goodbye for now, and make sure not to miss our next show next week.